Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I'm sorry, I just have to make a minor adjustment. Well, that's okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. At this point in time, I have to go over and share you with all of the medias of social. Let me see where I am. Come on. It always takes a moment for it to register that I'm online. Here we go. And then we have to hit the share button. Paste. Story time. And then we have to go down here. And then one more time, we have to go over to the Gentleman Psychic one. Where are my posts? Paste and go. And done. Hello, Courtney and Nathan. Hello, my friends. Hello, Amanda. Hello, Mary Jane. Hello, Amy Edwards. I'm doing well. Hello, everybody. So good to see you. I am so very tired. I've been going to the gym because I have been way too long, and I think I overworked myself because I came home today and I crashed for several hours, and I was so tired that I instead of posting to my own Facebook wall that we were doing story time tonight, I posted it to a friend's wall that we were doing story time tonight. So I'm a little, oh, hi, Lauren. I was just looking. Congratulations on your submission for the Getty. I didn't have a full chance to really look, but it looked amazing. I'm so very proud of you. Richard Goulet, hello, good evening. I'm doing very well, thank you. I have been exercising more than I had been before, which is more than anything, actually, because since everyone was on lockdown, and I don't want to say the C word. Hello, Sawan. Hello. I hope I said that correctly. I know you've corrected me before. Anyway, I was saying that I have been going to the gym, and I've been doing Zumba classes, and I've been doing cardio, and I've been doing weight training because health is really important, number one. But vanity is also really important. And my clothing was getting a little tight. And so, what is the most cost effective thing? Join a gym or replace my entire wardrobe. So, I opted, of course, to join the gym. So, I like to promote health. I like to promote things that are magic. I like to promote things that are exciting. I like to promote things that are beautiful, and that's where we are. Anyway, I am so glad that each and every one of you are here tonight. How are you? You can tell me in the comments. How are you tonight? I hope tonight you are feeling loved. I hope tonight you are feeling comfortable, feeling relaxed. I hope tonight you are feeling joy. I hope tonight that you are are enjoying being here in the moment. I know I am. I know it's sort of a disconnect since we're on the computer, but I I really appreciate each and every one of you, all of your likes, your comments, your shares. You mean the world to me. Thank you so much. That's all I have in the way of announcements. There is one more. There is one more announcement. Um, there is one more, and that is Scared and Alone. The themes, Courtney, we are doing Scared and Alone tomorrow, right? You can comment down below if you will. Anyway, I think we're doing Scared and Alone tomorrow night. I have to verify that. Scared and Alone tomorrow night. if memory serves, we're going to the Stone Mansion. Anyway, without further ado, my beauties, we will continue reading story time. Oh, by the way, my bookmarker. Several people have given me beautiful bookmarkers, which are all over the place. But this is a 19th century death card. So it says I'm not going to. I showed you the name. I shouldn't have possibly, but the person died December 28th, 1890, aged 61. Anyway, in loving memory, it's from G.L. Utter and Company Memorial Cards in Dearborn Street, Chicago. So, 19th century memento mori. I know I don't really look like a memento mori today because I'm all in white, but it was nearly 100 degrees today, and that's why I'm not wearing a jacket. Even though there is air conditioner, it is still quite warm. I feel like sitting on a porch drinking a mint julep. I hope everyone is still here. Anyway, I guess we will go ahead and continue. All right, my loves. Chapter 7. The Mediterranean in 48 Hours. The Mediterranean, the blue sea par excellence, the great sea, of the Hebrews, the sea of the Greeks, the Mare Nostrum of the Romans, bordered by orange trees, aloes, cacti, and sea pines, embalmed with the perfume of the myrtle, surrounded by the rude mountains, saturated with ground fires, a perfect battlefield in which Neptune and Pluto still dispute the empire of the world. It is upon these banks, and on these waters, says Michelet, that man is renewed in one of the most powerful climates of the globe. But, beautiful as it was, I could only take a rapid glance at the basin, whose superficial area is 2 millions of square yards. Even Captain Nemo's knowledge was lost to me, for this enigmatical person did not appear once during our passage at full speed. I estimated the course which the Nautilus took under the waves of the sea at about 600 leagues, and it was accomplished in 48 hours. Starting on the morning of the 16th of February from the shores of Greece, we were crossed the Straits of Gibraltar by sunrise on the 18th. It was plain to me that the Mediterranean, enclosed in the midst of those countries which he wished to avoid, was distasteful to Captain Nemo. Those waves and those breezes brought back too many remembrances, if not too many regrets. Here he had no longer that independence and that liberty of gait which he had when in the open sea, and his Nautilus felt itself cramped between the close shores of Africa and Europe. Our speed was now 25 miles an hour. It may be well understood that Ned Land, to his great disgust, was obliged to renounce his intended flight. He could not launch the pinnace, going at a rate of 12 or 13 yards every second. To quit the Nautilus under such conditions would be as bad as jumping from a train going at full speed. An imprudent thing, to say the least of it. Besides, our vessel only mounted to the surface of the waves at night to renew its stock of air. It was steered entirely by the compass and the log. I saw no more of the interior of the Mediterranean than a traveler by express train perceives of the landscape which flies before his eyes. That is to say, the distant horizon, and not the near objects which pass like a flash of lightning. In the midst of the massed waters, brightly lit up by the electric light, glided some of those lampreys, more than a yard long, common to almost every climate, some of the oxricani, a kind of ray 5 feet broad, with white belly and gray spotted back, spread out like a large shawl carried along by the current. Other rays passed so quickly that I could not see if they deserved the name of eagles, which was given to them by the ancient Greeks, or the qualification of rats, toads, and bats, with which modern fishermen have loaded them. A few millender sharks, 12 feet long, and much feared by divers, struggled among them. Sea foxes, 8 feet long, endowed with wonderful fine finesse of scent, appeared like large blue shadows. Some dorads of the shark kind, some measured 7 feet and a half, showed themselves in their dress of blue and silver, encircled by small bands which struck sharply against the somber tints of the fins at a fish consecrated to Venus, the eyes of which are increased in a socket of gold, a precious species, friend of all waters, fresh or salt, an inhabitant of rivers, lakes, and oceans, living in all climates and bearing all temperatures. A race belonging to the geological era of the earth, and which preserved all the beauty of its first days. Magnificent sturgeons, 9 or 10 yards long, creatures of the great speed, striking the panes of the glass with their strong tails, displayed their bluish backs with small brown spots. They resemble the sharks, but are not equal to them in strength, and are to be met with all seas. But of all the diverse inhabitants of the Mediterranean, those I observed to be the greatest advantage. When the Nautilus approached the surface, belonged to 63rd genus of bony fish. They were a kind of tunny with bluish black backs and silvery breastplates. Those dorsal fins threw out sparkles of gold. They are said to follow in the wake of vessels, whose refreshing shade they seek from the fire of tropical sky. And they did not belie the saying, for they accompanied the Nautilus, as they did in former times the vessel of La Perouse. For many a long hour they struggled to keep up with our vessel. I was never tired of admiring these creatures, really built for speed, their small heads, their bodies lithe and cigar-shaped, which in some were more like 3 yards long, their pectoral fins and forked tail endowed with remarkable strength. They swam in a triangle like certain flocks of birds whose rapidity they equaled, and of which the ancients used to say they understood geometry and strategy. But still, they do not escape the pursuit of the provincials, who esteem them as highly as the inhabitants of Propentus and of Italy used to do. And these precious but blind and foolhardy creatures perish by millions in the nets of the Maralays. With regard to the species of fish common to the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, the giddy speed of the Nautilus prevented me from observing them with any degree of accuracy. As to marine mammals, I thought in passing the entrance of the Adri- Adriatic that I saw two of the three shallots furnished with one dorsal fin of the genus of Phytosteria, some dolphins of the genus of Globophali, peculiar to the Mediterranean, the back part of the head being marked like a zebra, with small lines, also a dozen of seals with white bellies and black hair, known by the name of monks, and which really have their air of the Dominican. They are about 3 yards in length. As to zoophytes, for some instants I was able to admire the beautiful orange Galleria, which had fastened itself to the port panel. It held on by a long filament and was divided into an infinity of branches, terminated by the finest lace which could ever have been worn by the rivals of Arcane herself. Unfortunately, I could not take this admirable specimen, and doubtless no other Mediterranean zoophyte would have offered itself to my observation, if on that night of the 16th the Nautilus had not, singularly enough, slackened its speed under the following circumstances. We were then passing between Sicily and the coast of Tunis. In a narrow space between the Cape Bon and the Straits of Messina, the bottom of the sea rose almost suddenly. There was a perfect bank, on which there was not more than 9 fathoms of water, while on either side the depth was 90 fathoms. The Nautilus had to maneuver very carefully as to not strike against this submarine barrier. I showed Council on the map of the Mediterranean the spot occupied by the reef. But if you please, sir, observed Council, it is like a real isthmus joining Europe to Africa. Yes, my boy, it forms a perfect bar to the Straits of Libya, and the surroundings of Smith have proved that in former times the continents between Cape Bocco and Cape Furina were joined. I can well believe it, said Council. I will add, I continued, that a similar barrier exists between Gibraltar and Ceuta, which in geological times formed the entire Mediterranean. What if some volcanic burst should one day raise these two barriers above the water? It's not It's not probable, Council. Well, but allow me to finish, please, sir. If this phenomenon should take place, it will be troublesome for Monsieur Lepez, who had taken so much pains to pierce the isthmus. I agree with you, but I repeat, Council, this phenomenon will never happen. The violence of the subterranean force is ever diminishing. Volcanoes, so plentiful in the first days of the world, are being extinguished by degrees, and internal heat is weakened. The temperature of the lower strata of the globe is so lowered by the perceptible quantity every century to the determinant of our globe, for its heat is its life. But the sun? The sun is not sufficient, Council. Can it give heat to a deadly body? Not that I know of. Well, my friend, this earth will one day be that cold corpse. It will become uninhabitable and uninhabited like the moon, which was long since lost its vital heat. In how many centuries? In some hundreds, thousands of years, my boy. Then, said Council, we shall have time to finish this journey. That is, if Ned Land does not interfere with it. And Council, reassured, returned to the study of the bank, which the Nautilus was skirting at the moderate speed. There, beneath a rocky and volcanic bottom, lay outspread a living flora of sponges and reddish sidipes, which emitted a slight phosphorescent light, commonly known by the name of sea cucumbers, and walking commutulae more than a yard long, the purple of which completely colored the water around. The Nautilus, having now passed the high bank in Libyan Straits, returned to the deep waters and its accustomed speed. From that time, no more mollusks, no more articulates, no more zoophytes, barely a few large fish passing like shadows. During the night of the 16th and the 17th February, we had entered the second Mediterranean basin, the greatest depth of which was 1,450 fathoms. The Nautilus, by the action of its screw, slid down the inclined planes and buried itself in the lowest depths of the sea. On the 18th of February, about 3 o'clock in the morning, we were at the entrance of the Straits of Gibraltar. There once existed two currents, an upper one, long since recognized, which conveys the waters of the ocean into the basin of the Mediterranean, and a lower countercurrent, which reasoning has now shown to exist. Indeed, the volume of water in the Mediterranean incessantly added to the waves of the Atlantic, and by rivers falling into it, which each year raise the level of the sea, for its evaporation is not sufficient to restore the equilibrium. As it is not so, we must necessarily admit the existence of an undercurrent which empties into the basin of the Atlantic through the Straits of Gibraltar, the surplus waters of the Mediterranean. A fact indeed, and it was this countercurrent by which the Nautilus profited. It advanced rapidly by the narrow pass. For one instant, I caught a glimpse of the beautiful ruins of the Temple of Hercules, buried in the ground according to Pliny, and with low island which supports it. And a few minutes later, we were floating on the Atlantic. Chapter 8. Shrouded Grove, welcome. Red Panda, welcome. Thank you, Amanda. Hi, Mariah. Chapter 8, Vigo Bay. The Atlantic. A vast sheet of water whose superficial area covers 25 millions of square miles, the length of which is 9,000 miles, with a mean breadth of 2,700, an ocean whose parallel winding shores embrace an immense circumference, watered by the largest rivers of the world, the St. Lawrence, the Mississippi, the Amazon, the Plata, the Orinoco, the Niger, the Senegal, the Elbe, the Loire, the Or, and the Rhine, which carry water from the most civilized as well as from the most savage countries. Magnificent fields of water, incessantly plowed by vessels of every nation, sheltered by the flags of every nation, and which terminates in those two terrible points so dreaded by mariners, Cape Horn and Cape Tempests. The Nautilus was piercing the water with its sharp spur. After having accomplished nearly 10,000 leagues in 3 months and a half, a distance greater than the great circle of Earth, where were we going? And what was the reserve for the future? The Nautilus, leaving the Straits of Gibraltar, had gone far out. It returned to the surface of the waves, and our daily walks on the platform were restored to us. I mounted at once, accompanied by Ned Land and Council. At a distance of about 12 miles, Cape St. Vincent was dimly to be seen, forming the southwestern point of the Spanish peninsula. A strong southerly gale was blowing. The sea was swollen and billowy. It made the Nautilus rock violently. It was almost impossible to keep one's footing on the platform, which the heavy rolls of the sea beat over every instant. So we descended after inhaling some mouthfuls of fresh air. I returned to my room, Council to his cabin, but the Canadian, with a preoccupied air, followed me. Our rapid passage across the Mediterranean had not allowed him to put his project into execution, and he could not help showing his disappointment. When the door of my room was shut, he sat down and looked at me silently. "Friend Ned," said I understand you, but you cannot reproach yourself. To have attempted to leave the Nautilus under the circumstances would have been a folly." Ned Land did not answer. His compressed lips and frowning brow showed with him the violent possession this fixed idea had taken of his mind. "Let us see," I continued. "We need not despair yet. We are going up the coast of Portugal again. France and England are not far off, where we can easily find refuge. Now, if the Nautilus on leaving the Straits of Gibraltar had gone to the south, if it had carried us toward regions where there are no continents, I could share your uneasiness. But we know that now that Captain Nemo does not fly from civilized sea, and in some days I think you can act with security." Ned Land still looked at me fixedly. At length his fixed lips parted, and he said, "It is for tonight." I drew myself up suddenly. I was, I admit, little prepared for this communication. I wanted to answer the Canadian, but the words would not come. "We agreed to wait for an opportunity," continued Ned Land, "and the opportunity has arrived. This night we shall be but a few miles from the Spanish coast. It is cloudy. The wind blows freely. I have your word, Monsieur Arnoux, and I rely upon you." As I was still silent, the Canadian approached me. "Tonight, at 9 o'clock," he said. "I have warned Council. At that moment, Captain Nemo will be shut up in his room, probably in bed. Neither the engineers nor the ship's crew can see us. Council and I will gain central staircase, and you, Monsieur Arnoux, will remain in the library, 2 steps from us, waiting my signal. The oars, the mast, and the sail are in the canoe. I have an I have even succeeded in getting in some provisions. I have procured an English wrench to unfasten the bolts, which attach it to the shell of the Nautilus. So all is ready till tonight. The sea is bad. "That I allow," replied the Canadian, "but we must risk that. Liberty is worth paying for. Besides, the boat is strong, and a few miles with fair wind to carry us to is a great thing. Who knows? But by the tomorrow we may be 100 leagues away. Let circumstances only favor us, and by 10 or 11 o'clock we shall have landed on some spot of terra firma, alive or dead. But adieu now, till tonight." With these words, the Canadian withdrew, leaving me almost dumb. I had imagined that, the canoe gone, I should have time to reflect and discuss the matter. My obstinate companion had given me no time, and, after all, what could I have said to him? Ned Land was perfectly right. There was almost the opportunity to profit by. Could I retract my word and take upon myself the responsibility of compromising the future of my companions? Tomorrow, Captain Nemo might take us far from all land. At that moment, a rather loud hissing told me that the reservoirs were filling and that the Nautilus was sinking under the waves of the Atlantic. A sad day I passed, between the desire of regaining my liberty of action and abandoning the wonderful Nautilus and leaving my submarine studies incomplete. What dreadful hours I passed thus! Sometimes seeing myself and companions safely landed, sometimes wishing, in spite of my reason, that some unforeseen circumstances would prevent the realization of Ned Land's project. Twice I went to the saloon. I wished to consult the compass. I wished to see if the direction of the Nautilus was bringing us nearer or taking us further from the coast. But no, the Nautilus kept in Portuguese waters. I must therefore take my part and prepare for flight. My luggage was not heavy, my notes nothing more. As to Captain Nemo, I asked myself what he would think of our escape, what trouble, what wrong it might cause him, and what he might do in case of its discovery or failure. Certainly I had no cause to complain of him. On the contrary, never was hospitality freer than his. In leaving him, I could not be taxed with ingratitude. No oath bound us to him. It was on the strength of circumstances he relied, and not upon our word to fix for us forever. I had not seen the captain since our visit to the island of Santorini. Would chance bring me his presence before our departure? I wished it, and I feared it at the same time. I listened if I could hear him walking in the room, contiguous to mine. No sound reached my ear. I felt an unbearable uneasiness. This day of waiting seemed eternal. Hours struck too slowly to keep pace with my impatience. My dinner was served in my room as usual. I ate but little. I was too preoccupied. I left the table at 11 o'clock. 7 o'clock, 170 minutes, I counted them, still separated me from the moment in which I was to join Ned Land. My agitation redoubled. My pulse beat violently. I could not remain quiet. I went and came, hoping to calm my troubled spirit, and by constant movement. The idea of failure in our bold enterprise was the least painful of my anxieties. But the thought of seeing our project discovered before leaving the Nautilus, of being brought before Captain Nemo, irritated, or what was worse, saddened at my desertion, made my heart beat. I wanted to see the saloon for the last time. I descended the stairs and arrived in the museum where I had passed so many useful and agreeable hours. I looked at all its riches, all its treasures, like a man on the eve of eternal exile who is leaving never to return. These wonders of nature, these masterpieces of art, among which for so many days my life had been concentrated, I was going to abandon them forever. I should like to have taken a last look through the windows of the saloon into the waters of the Atlantic, but the panels were hermetically closed, and a cloak of steel separated me from that ocean which I had not yet explored. In passing through the saloon, I came near the door, let into the angle which opened into the captain's room. To my great surprise, this door was ajar. I drew back involuntarily. If Captain Nemo should be in his room, he could see me, but hearing no noise, I drew nearer. The room was deserted. I pushed open the door and took some steps forward, still the same monk-like severity of aspect. Suddenly, the clock struck 8. The first beat of the hammer on the bell awoke me from my dreams. I trembled, as if an invisible eye had plunged into my most secret thoughts, and I hurried from the room. There my eye fell on a compass. Our course was still north. The log indicated moderate speed. The manometer, a depth of about 60 feet. I returned to my room, clothed myself warmly, sea boots, an otter-skin cap, a great coat of byssus, lined with sealskin. I was ready. I was waiting. The vibration of the screw alone broke the deep silence which reigned on board. I listened attentively. Would no loud voice suddenly inform me that Ned Land had been surprised in his projected flight? A moral dread hung over me, and I vainly tried to regain my accustomed coolness. At a few minutes to 9, I put my ear to the captain's door. No noise. I left my room and returned to the saloon, which was half in obscurity, but deserted. I opened the door, communicating with the library, the same insufficient light, the same solitude. I placed myself near the door leading to the central staircase, and there waited for Ned Land's signal. At that moment, the trembling of the screw sensibility diminished. Then it stopped entirely. The silence was only disturbed by the beatings of my own heart. Suddenly, a slight shock was felt, and I knew that the Nautilus had stopped at the bottom of the ocean. My uneasiness increased. The Canadian's signal did not come. I felt inclined to join Ned Land and beg him to put off his attempt. I felt that we were not sailing under our usual conditions. At this moment, the door of the large saloon opened, and Captain Nemo appeared. He saw me, and without further preamble began in an amiable tone of voice. "Ah, sir, I have been looking for you. Do you know the history of Spain? Now, one might know the history of one's own country by heart, but in the condition I was at the time, with troubled mind and head quite lost, I could not have said a word of it." Well, continued Captain Nemo, "you heard my question. Do you know the history of Spain?" "Very slightly," I answered. "Well, here are learned men having to learn," said the captain. "Come, sit down, and I will tell you a curious episode in this history. Sir, listen well," said he. "This history will interest you on one side, for it will answer a question which doubtless you have not been able to solve." "I listen, Captain," and said I, not knowing what my interlocutor was driving at, and asking myself if this incident was bearing on our projected flight. "Sir, if you have no objection, we will go back to 1702. You could not be ignorant of your King Louis XIV, thinking that the gesture of the potentate was sufficient to bring the Pyrenees under his yoke, had imposed the Duke of Anjou, his grandson, on the Spaniards. This prince reigned more or less badly under the name of Philip V, and had strong party against him abroad. Indeed, the preceding year, the royal houses of Holland, Austria, and England had concluded a treaty of alliance at Hague, with the intention of plucking the crown of Spain from the head of Philip V and placing it on that of the Archduke, to whom they prematurely gave the title Charles III. Spain must resist this coalition, but he was almost entirely unprovided with either soldiers or sailors. However, money would not fail them, provided that their galleons, laden with gold and silver from America, once entered their ports. And about the end of 1702, they expected a rich convoy, which France was escorting with a fleet of 23 vessels, commanded by Admiral Chateaurenaud. For the ships of the coalition were already beating the Atlantic. This convoy was to go to Cadiz, but the admiral, hearing that an English fleet was cruising in those waters, resolved to make for a French port. The Spanish commanders of the convoy objected to this decision. They wanted to be taken to a Spanish port, and if not Cadiz, into Vigo Bay, situated on the northwest coast of Spain, and which was not blocked. Admiral Chateaurenaud had the rashness to obey this injunction, and the galleons entered Vigo Bay. Unfortunately, it formed an open road which could not be defended in any way. They, therefore, hastened to unload the galleons before the arrival of the combined fleet, and time would not have failed them had not a miserable question of rivalry suddenly arisen. "You are following the chain of events?" asked the captain. "Perfectly," said I, not knowing the end proposed by this historical lesson. "I will continue. This is what passed. The merchants of Cadiz had a privilege by which they had the right of receiving all merchandise coming from the West Indies. Now, to disembark these ingos at the port of Vigo was depriving them of their rights. They complained at Madrid and obtained the consent of the weak-minded Philip that the convoy, without discharging its cargo, should remain sequestered in the roads of Vigo until enemy had disappeared. But while coming to this decision, on the 22nd day of October, 1702, the English vessels arrived in Vigo Bay, when Admiral Chateaurenaud, in spite of inferior forces, fought bravely. But seeing that the treasure must fall into the enemy's hands, he burned and scuttled every galleon, which went to the bottom of their immense richness." Captain Nemo stopped. I admit I could not yet see why this history should interest me. "Well?" I asked. "Well, Monsieur Arnaud," replied Captain Nemo, "we are in that Vigo Bay, and it rests with yourself whether you will penetrate its mysteries." The captain rose, telling me to follow him. I had time to recover. I obeyed. The saloon was dark, but through the transparent glass the waves were sparkling. I looked. For half a mile around the Nautilus, the water seemed bathed in electric light. The sandy bottom was clean and bright. Some of the ship's crew in their diving dresses were clearing away half-rotten barrels and empty cases from the midst of the blackened wrecks. From these cases, and from those barrels, escaped ingots of gold and silver, cascades of piastres and jewels. The sand was heaped up with them. Laden with their precious booty, the men returned to the Nautilus, disposed of their burden, and went back to this inexhaustible fishery of gold and silver. I understood now. This was the scene of the battle of the 22nd of October, 1702. Here, on this very spot, the galleons laden for the Spanish government had sunk. Here Captain Nemo came, according to his wont, to pack up those millions with which he burdened the Nautilus. It was for him and him alone America had given up her precious metals. He was heir direct, without any one to share in those treasures torn from the Incas and from the conquered of Ferdinand Cortez. "Did you know, sir," he asked, smiling, "that the sea contained such riches?" "I knew," I answered, "that they value the money held in suspension in these waters at 2 millions. "Doubtless, but to extract this money, the expense would be greater than the profit. Here, on the contrary, I have but to pick up what man has lost, and not only in Vigo Bay, but in 1,000 other spots where shipwrecks have happened, and which are marked on my submarine map. Can you understand now the source of the millions I am worth?" "I understand, Captain. But allow me to tell you what, in exploring Vigo Bay, have you been beforehand with a rival society?" "And which?" "A society which has received from the Spanish government the privilege of seeking these buried galleons. The shareholders are led on by the allurement of an enormous bounty, for they value rich shipwrecks at 500 millions. 500 millions they were," answered Captain Nemo, "but they are no longer." "Just so," said I, "and a warning to those shareholders would be an act of charity, but who knows if it would be well received? What gamblers usually regret above all is less the loss of their money than their foolish hopes. After all, I pity them less than the thousands of unfortunates to whom much riches, well distributed, would have been profitable, while for them they will be forever barren. I had no sooner expressed this regret than I felt that it must have wounded Captain Nemo. "Baron," he exclaimed with an animation, "do you think then, sir, that these riches are lost because I gather them? Is it for myself alone, according to your idea, that I take the trouble to collect these treasures? Who told you that I did not make a good use of it? Do you think I am ignorant that there are suffering beings and oppressed races on the earth, miserable creatures to console, victims to avenge? Do you not understand?" Captain Nemo stopped at these last words, regretting perhaps that he had spoken so much. But I had guessed that, whatever the motive which had forced him to seek independence under the sea, it had left him still a man, that his heart still beat for the sufferings of humanity, and that his immense charity was for oppressed races as well as individuals. And I then understood for whom those millions were destined, which were forwarded by Captain Nemo when the Nautilus was cruising in the waters of Crete. Chapter 9. The next morning, the 19th of February, I saw the Canadian enter my room. I expected this visit. He looked very disappointed. "Well, sir," said he. "Well, Ned, fortune was against us yesterday." "Yes, that captain must needs stop exactly at the hour we intended leaving his vessel." "Yes, Ned. He had business at his banker's." "His banker's? Or rather, his banking house. By that I mean the ocean, where his riches are safer than in the chests of the state." I then related to the Canadian the incidents of the preceding night, hoping to bring him back to the idea of not abandoning the captain, but my recital had no other result than an energetically expressed regret from Ned that he had not been able to take a walk on the battlefield of Vigo on his own account. "However," said he, "all is not ended. It is only a blow of the harpoon lost. Another time we must succeed, and tonight, if necessary." "In what direction is this Nautilus going?" I asked. "I do not know," replied Ned. "Well, at noon we shall see the point." The Canadian returned to council. As soon as I was dressed, I went into the saloon. The compass was not reassuring. The course of the Nautilus was SSW. We were turning our backs on Europe. I waited with some impatience till the ship's place was pricked in the chart. At about 11:30, the reservoirs were emptied, and our vessel rose to the surface of the ocean. I rushed toward the platform. Ned Land had preceded me. No more land in sight. Nothing but an immense sea. Some sails on the horizon, doubtless those going to San Roque in search of favorable winds, doubling the Cape of Good Hope. The weather was cloudy. A gale of wind was preparing. Ned raved and tried to pierce the cloudy horizon. He still hoped that behind all that fog stretched the land he so longed for. At noon, the sun showed itself for an instant, and a second profited by this brightness to take its height. Then, the sea becoming more billowy, we descended, and the panel closed. An hour after, upon consulting the chart, I saw the position of the Nautilus was marked at 16 degrees 17 longitude and 33 degrees 22 latitude. At 150 leagues from the nearest coast, there was no means of flight, and I leave you to imagine the rage of the Canadian when I informed him of our situation. For myself, I was not particularly sorry. I felt light-ended of the load which oppressed me, and was able to return to some degree of calmness to my accustomed work. That night, about 11 o'clock, I received the most unexpected visit from Captain Nemo. He asked me very graciously if I felt fatigued from my watch of the preceding night. I answered in the negative. "Then, Monsieur Arnaud, I propose a curious excursion." "Propose, Captain?" You have hitherto only visited the submarine depths by daylight, under the brightness of the sun. Would it suit you to see them in the darkness of the night? Most willingly. I warn you, the way will be tiring. We shall have far to walk and must climb a mountain. The roads are not well kept. What you say, Captain, only heightens my curiosity. I am ready to follow you. Come then, sir. We will put on our diving dress. Arrived at the robing room, I saw that neither of my companions nor any of the ship's crew were to follow us on this excursion. Captain Nemo had not even proposed my taking with me either Ned or Counsel. In a few moments, we had put on our diving dresses. They placed on our backs the reservoirs abundantly filled with air, but no electric lamps were prepared. I called the captain's attention to the fact. They will be useless, he replied. I thought I had heard aright, but I could not repeat my observation, for the captain's head had already disappeared in his metal case. I finished harnessing myself. I felt them put on the iron-pointed stick in my hand, and some minutes later, after going through the usual form, we set foot on the bottom of the Atlantic at the depth of 150 fathoms. Midnight was near. The waters were profoundly dark, but Captain Nemo pointed out in the distance a reddish spot of sort of large light shining brilliantly about 2 miles from the Nautilus. What was the fire might be? What could feed it? Why and how it lit up? The liquid mass I could not say. In any case, it did light our way. Vaguely, it is true, but I soon accustomed myself to the peculiar darkness, and I understood, under such circumstances, the uselessness of the Rumkorov apparatus. As we advanced, I heard a kind of pattering above my head, the noise, redoubling sometimes, producing a continual shower. I soon understood the cause. It was rain falling violently and crisping the surface of the waves. Instinctively, the thought flashed across my mind that I should be wet, though. By the water, in the midst of the sea water? I could not help laughing at the odd idea, but indeed, the thick diving dress, the liquid element is no longer felt, and only seems to be an atmosphere, somewhat denser than the terrestrial atmosphere. Nothing more. After half an hour's walk, the soil became stony. Medusae, microscopic crustacea, and pentulles lit it with slightly with their phosphorescent gleam. I caught a glimpse of pieces of stone covered with millions of zoophytes and masses of seaweed. My feet often slipped upon this viscous carpet and seaweed, and without my iron-tipped stick, I should have fallen more than once. I turned round. I could still see the whitish lantern of the Nautilus beginning to pale in the distance, but the rosy light which guided us increased and lit up the horizon. The presence of this fire under the water puzzled me in a height of degree. Was it some electric effulgence? Was I going toward a natural phenomenon as yet unknown to the savants of Earth? Or even, for this thought crossed my brain, had the hand of man aught to do with this conflagration? Had he fanned this flame? Was I to meet in these depths companions and friends of Captain Nemo, who he was going to visit and who, like him, led this strange existence? Should I find down there a whole colony of exiles who, weary of the miseries of this earth, had sought and found independence in the deep ocean? All these foolish and unreasonable ideas pursued me, and in this condition of mind, overexcited by the succession of wonders continually passing before my eyes, I should not have been surprised to meet at the bottom of the sea one of those submarine towns of which Captain Nemo dreamed. Our road grew lighter and lighter. The white glimmer came in rays from the summit of a mountain. About 800 feet high. But what I saw was simply a reflection developed by the clearness of waters. The source of this inexplicable light was a fire on the opposite side of the mountain. In the midst of this stony maze, furrowing the bottom of the Atlantic, Captain Nemo advanced without hesitation. He knew this dreary road. Doubtless he had often travelled over it, and could not lose himself. I followed him with unshaken confidence. He seemed to me like a genie of the sea, and as he walked before me, I could not help admiring his stature, which was outlined in black on the luminous horizon. It was one of the morning. It was 1 in the morning when we arrived at the first slopes of the mountain, but to gain access to them, we must venture through the difficult paths of the vast copse. Yes, a copse of dead trees, without leaves, without sap trees, petrified by the action of the water, and here and there overstepped by gigantic pines. It was like a coal pit still standing, holding by the roots to the broken soil, and whose branches, like fine black paper cuttings, showed distinctly on the watery ceiling. Picture to yourself a forest in the heart, hanging on the sides of the mountain, but a forest swallowed up. The paths were encumbered with seaweed and fucus, between which grovelled a whole world of crustacea. I went along, climbing the rocks, striding over extended trunks, breaking the sea-bind weed, which hung from one tree to another, and frightening the fishes, which flew from branch to branch. Pressing onward, I felt no fatigue. I followed my guide, who was never tired. What a spectacle! How can I express it? How paint the aspect of those woods and rocks in this medium, their underparts dark and wild, the upper colored with red tints, by that light which the reflecting powers of the waters doubled? We climbed rocks which fell directly after gigantic bounds, and the low growling of an avalanche. To right and left ran along dark galleries where sight was lost. Here opened the vast glades which the hand of man seemed to have worked, and I sometimes asked myself if some inhabitant of these submarine regions would not suddenly appear to me. But Captain Nemo was still mounting. I could not stay behind. I followed boldly. My stick gave me good help. A false step would have been dangerous on the narrow passes sloping down to the sides of the gulfs, but I walked with firm step, without feeling any giddiness. Now I jumped a crevice, the depth of which would have made me hesitate, but it had been the glaciers on land. Now I ventured on the steady trunk of a tree, thrown across from one abyss to the other without looking under my feet, having only eyes to admire the wild sights of this region. There, monumental rocks leaning on their regularly cut bases seemed to defy all laws of equilibrium. From between their stony knees, trees sprang like a jet under heavy pressure and upheld others which upheld them. Natural towers, large scarps cut perpendicularly like a curtain, inclined at an angle which the laws of gravity could never have tolerated in terrestrial regions. 2 hours after quitting the Nautilus, we had crossed the line of trees, and 100 feet above our heads rose the top of the mountain, which cast a shadow on the brilliant irradiation of the opposite slope. Some petrified shrubs ran fantastically here and there. Fishes got up under our feet like birds in the long grass. The massive rocks were rent with impenetrable fractures, deep grottos, and unfathomable holes, at the bottom of which formidable creatures might have heard moving. My blood curdled when I saw enormous antennae blocking my road, or some frightful claw closing with noise in the shadow of cavity. Millions of luminous spots shone brightly in the midst of the darkness. They were the eyes of giant crustacea, eroached in their holes, giant lobsters setting themselves up like halberders and moving their claws with a clicking sound of pincers, titanic crabs pointed like a gun on its carriage, and frightful-looking polyps interweaving their tentacles like living nests of serpents. We had now arrived on the first platform, where other surprises awaited me. Before us lay some picturesque ruins which betrayed the hand of man and not that of a creator. There was vast heaps of stone, among which might be traced two vague and shadowy forms of castles and temples clothed with a world of blossoming zoophytes, and over which, instead of ivy, seaweed, and fucus, threw a thick vegetable mantle. But what was this portion of the globe which had been swallowed up by cataclysms? Who had placed those rocks and stones like comliths of prehistoric times? Where was I? Whither had Captain Nemo's fancy hurried me? I would fain have asked him, not being able to. I stopped him, I seized his arm, but shaking his head and pointing to the highest point of the mountains, he seemed to say, "Come, come along, come higher." I followed, and in a few minutes I had climbed to the top, which for a circle of 10 yards commanded the whole mass of rock. I looked down the side we had just climbed. The mountain did not rise more than 700 or 800 feet above the level of the plain, but on the opposite side it commanded from twice the height and depth of this art of the Atlantic. My eyes ranged far over a large space lit by a violent fulguration. In fact, the mountain was a volcano. At 50 feet above the peak, in the midst of the rain of stones and scoriae, a large crater was vomiting forth torrents of lava, which fell in cascade of fire into bosoms of liquid mass. Thus situated, this volcano lit the lower plain like an immense torch, even to the extreme limits of the horizon. I said that the submarine crater threw up lava, but no flames. Flames require the oxygen of air to feed upon and cannot be developed underwater. But streams of lava, having in themselves the principles of their incandescence, can attain a white heat, fight vigorously against the liquid element, and turn it into vapor by contact. Rapid currents bearing all these gases in diffusion, and torrents of lava slid to the bottom of the mountain like an eruption of Vesuvius on another Terra del Greco. There indeed, under my eyes, ruined, destroyed, lay a town, its roofs open to the sky, its temples fallen, its arches dislocated, its columns laying on the ground, which one could still recognize the massive character of Tuscan architecture. Further on, some remains of gigantic aqueduct, here the high base of an acropolis, with a floating outline of a Parthenon. There, traces of a quay, as if an ancient port had formerly abutted the borders of the ocean and disappeared, with its merchant vessels and its war galleys. Further on, again, long lines of sunken walls and broad deserted streets, a perfect Pompeii, escaped beneath the waters. Such was the sight which Captain Nemo brought before my eyes. Where was I? Where was I? I must know at any cost. I tried to speak, but Captain Nemo stopped me by gesture, and picking up a piece of chalk stone, advanced to a rock, a black basalt, and traced the one word, Atlantis. What a light shot through my mind. Atlantis, the ancient Mephorus of Theompus, the Atlantis of Plato, the continent denied by Origen, Jambalus de Anvil. One moment. Maltbrun and Humboldt, who placed its disappearance among the legendary tales admitted by Poseidonus, Philony, Aminius, Marcellinus, Turritelian, Engel, Buffon, and Diavec. I had it there, now before my eyes, bearing upon it the unexceptionable testimony of its catastrophe. The region thus engulfed was beyond Europe, Asia, and Libya, beyond the columns of Hercules. There those powerful people of the Atlantic lived, against whom the first wars of ancient Greece were waged. Thus led by the strangest destiny, I was treading underfoot the mountains of this continent, touching with my hand those ruins 1,000 generations old and contemporary with geological epochs. I was walking on the very spot where the contemporaries of the first man had walked. While I was trying to fix in my mind every detail of this grand landscape, Captain Nemo remained motionless, as if petrified in mute ecstasy. Leaning on a mossy stone, he was dreaming of those generations long since disappeared. Was he asking them of the secret of human destiny? Was it here this strange man came to steep himself in historical recollections and live again this ancient life? He who wanted no modern one? What would I not have given to know his thoughts, to share them, to understand them? We remained for an hour at this place, contemplating the vast plain under the brightness of the lava, which was sometimes wonderfully intense. Rapid tremblings ran along the mountain, caused by internal bubblings. Deep noises, distinctly transmitted through the liquid medium, were echoed with majestic grandeur. At this moment, the moon appeared through the mass of waters and threw her pale rays on the buried continent. It was but a gleam, but what an indescribable effect! The captain rose, cast one last look on this immense plain, and then bade me to follow him. We descended the mountain rapidly, and the mineral forest once passed, I saw the lantern of the Nautilus shining like a star. The captain walked straight to it, and we got on board as first rays of light whitened the surface of the ocean. That is where we end for the evening. Let me go through and see what we have here. Shrouded Grove says, I just woke from a scary-ish dream. It wasn't too scary, but it was weird. Two men from the Royal Mail were trying to enter my home. They were trying to unlock my front door with a set of keys. I was with my brother sitting downstairs. I always have my knife close by. It was under my pillow as I sleep in the sheath, so I grabbed it in my dream and opened the door and waved at the men, but I was afraid and threatened them. They were both tall and not afraid of my knife. I then woke up, not a violent man, but always have violent dreams if I ever do dream. Can anybody tell me Richard Lale's Patreon? I typed the Patreon in the description, but I got 404 page lost. Oh, interesting. It should be under patreon.com/ the gentleman psychic. I might have to go and check that. I've been more lackadaisical than I would like to be, admittedly. I've this year has been one of chaos for me. Mariah Moore says, thank you for opening my eyes about Satanism. I never liked Satanists and was quite afraid of them. But listening to you speak about it, I now understand and accept Satanists, and I love your art. Thank you very much. Yes, people get a weird idea about Satanists because people oftentimes think that we are how we're portrayed in those horror films of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we are just people. We get a bad rap sometimes. People think people think that Satan represents evil and darkness, and it's actually quite funny because it's the exact opposite. It just means opponent. And I also love Lucifer as well, in the sense that they're different characters, but Lucifer represents the illumination of the mind. It represents, it's more human, it's humanitarian. So one can be satanic and Luciferian. That's my thought. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining me tonight. I so appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for all your likes, your comments, your shares. It really means the world to me. And thank you to my moderator, Lauren. Thank you for being here. Let me go back and see who else. Shrouded Grove said, made it late. Well, welcome. Hi, Red Panda. Love your voice. Thank you very much. Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. I so appreciate you. I'll keep you updated. I'm pretty certain tomorrow is Scared and Alone, and I'm looking forward to that. At any rate, I appreciate each and every one of you. You can find my art on my Instagram, rather. If you go to my Instagram, Richard Lale Lillard, or the Gentleman Psychic is the other one, the Parlor of the Gentleman Psychic. Those are both my Instagrams. The Parlor of the Gentleman Psychic, I don't really use a whole lot. That was really just used to promote things that I was trying to move along, but it kind of has devolved from there. I do have some exciting things on the horizon, but I'm not at liberty to talk about it yet. But I love each and every one of you. Thank you so much. It means the world to me that you are here, and I appreciate you. Good night, good morning, pleasant dreams. I hope you can. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll check it out tomorrow. It's too late tonight. I'm exhausted. But anyway, my loves, I appreciate you, and I will see you tomorrow and next week. Love to you. Take care. Bye-bye.